This is a reading from Modern Saints by Anne Ball. Chapter 39, Saint Raphaella. Saint Raphaella Mary of the Sacred Heart, ACJ. Raphaella Francisca del Rosario Rudecinda de Porras. Born 1850 in Spain, died 1925 in Italy at the age of 74. In the early years of the 1920s, an elderly nun could be seen dusting and sweeping in the convent of the Handmaids of the Sacred Heart in Rome. She was known as Mother Raphaella Mary of the Sacred Heart, but few people know the true story of her life. Although Mother Raphaella Mary had founded the order and been its first superior, dissension led her to resign her office for the good of the community. The leaders of the order, including her own sister, then declared her mentally deficient and sent her to this Roman convent of the order to keep her away from their community. They even went so far as to claim all the credit for the beginning of the order. In her obituary, Mother Raphaella Mary is listed simply as one of the first members of the Institute. For almost 33 years, Raphaella's only concern was to fulfill God's will by leading a humble and obedient life. This she did with silent serenity and great charity. In 1977, the Saint of Silence was given to the Universal Church as an example of heroic charity and humility. Raphaella was born March 1st, 1850, to a Spanish family of well-to-do landowners with extensive olive groves. When she was 5, her father died nursing the victims of the cholera plague then raging in the district. Raphaella, her only sister Dolores, and her brother Henry were taught at home by a priest tutor. Many years later, Raphaella recalled the most important lesson she learned from him. One day, she was vainly admiring herself in the mirror, rearranging her curls and smiling at how attractive she was. Suddenly, her tutor came up behind her and asked, "Raphaelita, how do you think you will look a quarter hour after your death?" Even at an early age, she had had the opportunity to observe death closely. Her father and 4 of her brothers and sisters had died. Years later, as she told the story, Raphaella said, "That was my conversion." When Raphaella was 19, her mother died. She asked herself a question and answered it. For what was I born? To save my soul. For the rest of her life, she held firm to her decision to save her soul. Later, she willingly endured a life of silence and exile as reparation to save the souls of others. Raphaella and her only sister Dolores loved each other very much, but throughout their lives, a personality conflict led to many difficulties. Dolores had a very forceful personality and felt that as the elder, she was automatically the wiser and more capable. Raphaella, on the other hand, was a peaceful person. Although she had her own opinions, she learned at an early age that for the sake of peace, it was often better to voice them but rarely. Her refusal to enter into arguments was misinterpreted by her friends as a sign that she was mentally slower than they. Although humble, Raphaella was also sensitive, and these attitudes hurt her. After the death of their mother and a younger brother shortly thereafter, Raphaella and Dolores went into mourning. In the late 1800s, persons in mourning wore plain, dark clothes and did not attend parties or other social entertainments for about a year. The sisters met these conditions and began doing several charitable works. Their friends and relatives thought they were simply being scrupulous about the period of mourning, but in reality, Raphaella and Dolores were living a deeply spiritual life. At the end of the customary mourning period, when the girls failed to resume fancy clothes and begin attending social events, their relatives began to mutter about lost opportunities for marriage and excessive piety. Both girls felt that they had vocations to the religious life. Knowing that their relatives would object strenuously, Raphaella decided on a daring plan. She and Dolores wished to live for a while as guests of the Franciscan sisters while deciding which order to apply to for admission. With 2 cousins and a friend, they left for a visit to the convent. At the convent, a sister appeared, and Dolores and Raphaella entered the enclosure, leaving the other 3 in the waiting room. Finally, one of the sisters came to inform the bewildered trio that the girls were not planning to return. These 3 left to spread the news to the other relatives. The 2 sisters decided to promise obedience to the clerical superiors and allow them to make the decision of the proper order. These superiors first decided that the girls should become visitation nuns, and later they should join a French order which had been recently invited to establish a house in the diocese. Although the girls began their novitiate with this order, difficulties arose between the superiors and the local clergy, which resulted in the French sisters' return to France. The 16 Spanish novices stayed to begin a new community, and the bishop appointed Rafaela as the superior. Again, difficulties arose. The bishop rewrote the rule, and the sisters felt that the new version was not a true reflection of their vocation. Late one night, they left the convent for Madrid. From its small beginning in Madrid, the community began to grow rapidly. The sisters' life was both contemplative and active. One reason for the community's rapid growth was the fact that Rafaela combined love with a great deal of common sense in her advice to the sisters. To a sister who was languishing, Rafaela wrote, "Take good care of yourself. Have a good appetite. God does not want his spouses to look as though he fed them on lizards." To another sister in danger of losing her serenity, she wrote, "When you are in panic, mosquitoes look like elephants." A vigorous plea for cheerful service was made with the words, "For God's sakes, don't let me hear that you have sour faces." Formal approval of the Handmaids of the Sacred Heart was given in 1887. The constitution of the new order required the election of a superior general and 4 advisors. Rafaela was unanimously elected superior, and her sister Dolores, Mother Purissima, and 2 others were elected advisors. Of these 4 nuns, Rafaela later wrote in some retreat notes, "I am nailed to my cross with 4 painful nails. There is no offense on their part, for like the Lord's nails, they are put there by the will of the Eternal Father. I must live willingly nailed by them." The advisors were supposed to help the superior govern. Instead, they were a great hindrance to effective government. There were a number of reasons for their actions: a scanty knowledge of canon law, their belief that they were better administrators than Rafaela, and a misunderstanding of their role. The disunion was especially painful for Rafaela because of her own sister's part in it, but she believed that the assistants were doing what they considered best, and never blamed them. Once out of office, she accepted them as legitimate authority, to whom she gave unfailing obedience. It is a tribute to Rafaela that no one outside the government of the congregation suspected the strife. Rafaela resigned her post in March of 1893 at the age of 43, at the prime of her physical and mental powers. She ceased to have any part in the government of the order which she had founded. "My duty is to be silent, to pray and to suffer." Rafaela was well loved in the community. The new superiors wanted to remove her from the rest of the sisters for fear she would tell the true story of her resignation. She was sent to the Roman house of the order, where she was refused any status except that of a former leader. For the next 30 years, she did sewing and domestic chores which she found needed to be done, but she was not given any official job to do. Before her resignation, the assistants had spread false rumors about Rafaela, one of which was that she was mentally incompetent. This may partially explain why she was never assigned any official duties. After Rafaela's resignation, Dolores was elected to the top position. She found the job no easier than her sister had. When the same pattern was repeated in her own life, she began to realize how much she had hurt her sister and asked how she could make amends. Rafaela simply told her to work for the good of the congregation. Dolores tried, but was not successful. In 1903, she too resigned and went to Valladolid, where she lived the remaining 13 years of her life. During this time, Rafaela continually wrote to encourage her not to be bitter about her treatment. Mother Purissima became Superior General and in 1911 was elected to the post for life. Later, however, she was removed from office because she was failing both in mind and in body. In spite of her cruel treatment of Rafaela, Mother Purissima had many qualities for which she was justly admired. During the beatification process, she gave evidence in Rafaela's favor. In 1906, Rafaela was allowed to tour some of the Spanish houses of the order, but because the nuns received her so joyously, Mother Purissima recalled her to Rome and canceled the remaining scheduled visits. Rafaela was not allowed to visit Dolores before her death. When Rafaela died at the age of 74, only a few of the sisters remembered her as a superior. The rest, if they even knew she had existed, had no idea she was the foundress. At the General Council of the Order in 1911, Mother Purissima had stated that both the Porras sisters were mentally deranged. She had gone so far as to accept, in Rafaela's presence, tributes to herself as being mainly responsible for the foundation of the order. To have told the truth when Rafaela died would have gravely damaged her own reputation. Therefore, neither Mother Purissima nor any of the assistants ever attended her funeral. No inscription on her tomb ever hinted at the part Rafaela had played in the formation of the order. As mentioned earlier, in her obituary, she is described only as one of the first members of the Institute. Within the last 10 years of her life, Rafaela developed a serious condition, which even after several operations left her with a stiff knee and caused a great deal of pain. Later, a sore which was constantly infected added to the problem. Still, she managed to drag herself about with the help of a stick, and she did mending and other small tasks for the sisters. In 1922, she became ill and received the last sacraments. She and all the sisters at the Roman house thought her death was imminent. Her prayers at the time for the community so impressed the other sisters that they began to realize that Rafaela was far more than simply a feeble-minded elderly sister. Rafaela rallied, and for the next 3 years her sick room was a magnet, drawing the sisters to the presence of this holy nun. Still, no words of condemnation or attempt at self-vindication came from her. Her days were spent in praying, mending, and suffering. Following the pattern of her life, her last days were days of suffering borne silently and serenely. On her final day, Rafaela knew she was dying, and she said to the infirmarian, "When you think I am dead, keep on saying prayers into my ear, for I shall hear." Later she said, "Only a little while now. I will await you all in heaven." One of Rafaela's confessors had once advised her, "Have a little patience, and one day you shall shine as bright as the sun." He did not know how prophetic his words were to be. "How do you think you will look a quarter hour after your death?" she had been asked. Neither she nor her tutor imagined the wondrous expression of peace and happiness which her face would show after she died. 30 years after Rafaela's death, her body was still incorrupt, and thousands came to see one who had loved and been loved by God. Her body has since decomposed. The skeleton lies in a beautiful wax figurine in the chapel dedicated to her in Rome. In 1938, the Superior General, elected after the forced resignation of Mother Purissima, courageously began an examination of Rafaela's life. After the required investigation by the Church, she was beatified in 1952 and canonized in 1977. This picture was taken right after St. Rafaela's death. Her body remained incorrupt for 30 years. St. Rafaela Mary de Porres before she became a nun. Her conversion took place when, as a young girl, she was vainly admiring her curls. In a mirror, a priest came up behind her and asked, "Rafaelita, how do you think you will look a quarter hour after your death?" This picture has been retouched. St. Rafaela Mary de Porres, foundress of the Handmaids of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. She was falsely declared mentally incompetent and sent away from the order she had founded. She practiced constant obedience and resignation in this trial, which lasted the rest of her life.